Hi, folks. It's an honor to be here for this event on the people who we count on to be competent. I used to be one of you. I was an electrical engineer. I was involved in microelectronics, helping move Moore's Law along. And then I became a scientist, and then I found a way to make a living by being interesting, whereas you folks have to be right. So I really admire that, especially having been in those trenches. We live in a time when we're trying to figure out what's going on in front of us. And this attempt to anticipate the future is part of what we are. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's an era in which almost all the technological trends keep upending what we expected. How many of you have heard of the Negroponte flip? The notion that whatever was once wired is becoming wireless, and whatever was once wireless becomes wired. Think about how many examples you can think of the flip. Business records, for example, something that you're very much involved in, have moved from filing cabinets to floppy disks to hard disks to in-house IT to the cloud, and now people are talking about mesh sharing among wherever the data may happen to find itself. And of course, then there's the ever-looming notion of AI. The pace of change is phenomenal, and Moore's Law is only a tepid example of it if you look at the pace of change in biology, for example, or what's sometimes called Brin's corollary to Moore's Law, the fact that cameras get smaller, faster, cheaper, more numerous, more mobile and better, every single year faster. And so we're faster than Moore's Law. So what we're dealing with is, some people extrapolate, something called the singularity. How many of you have heard of that? Well, of course, more than are raising your hands. Well, I have a little quotation here from Werner Vinge, and the notion is that the singularity may become something that disrupts everything we think about what we are, who we are as human beings. And it's a time that you may live in. I expect, I'm known as a bit of a grouch in this community. I think that they will succeed, but they're not going to turn us into gods overnight, and probably not in time for this body. Nevertheless, 40 years. You were promised the near future. Well, 40 years is pretty darn far future. In my novel Earth, back in 1989, it had web pages. Lots of my fans keep a wiki following some of the predictions. But I set that 50 years in the future because that was the farthest that anything really plausible could be said about the future. And it means you could pluck yourself from 50 years ago and bring her or him to this time. You have to catch that sense that half the time that younger self would be saying, wow, we never thought of that. And what would they be saying the other half the time? You mean you're still doing that? Catching that mix of opportunities lost and new opportunities suddenly erupting. And this is the basic balance that we have between optimism and pessimism. And in our society, there are forces that are trying to get us to spend all of our time in the pessimistic side because they sell more apocalypse, they sell more dystopia, they sell more fear. Well, there certainly is lots to do. We have to deal with hunger and decaying infrastructure and spreading deserts and spreading garbage and the possibility that the spread of freedom might reverse. We have the possibility that we're changing the very atmosphere of the planet that we depend on for life. And of course, after 6,000 years of class warfare, we experienced 60 years in which middle-class Americans actually experienced the illusion that no other civilization, people in any other civilization, ever endured. And that is the illusion that there's no such thing as class and no such thing as class war. Well, it may be coming back. So get used to thinking about which side you're on. The point is, We have to deal with all the fears of possible natural disasters. So we have a daunting future to deal with, and there's a lot at stake. So how do we go about solving problems? What technology makes the crucial difference? Well, that's the technology we're born with. These prefrontal lobes, these nubs just above the eyes, are the last thing we ever evolved. We share the medulla and the cerebellum with fish. We share the mammalian cortex with other mammals. Layered on top of that is the primate cortex that we share with apes. But the prefrontal lobes are new, and they're what enable us to deal with the new, where we do what Einstein called the Gedanken experiment, the thought experiment. What might happen if I spread this idea around the water cooler? What might happen if I present this at the conference? What might happen if I wear this today, or if I try to run this yellow light? This is the seat of anticipation, and it's a huge part of our civilization. Any business manager is paid to be a seer, a prognosticator, to plan what's happening next year in the business. I was just in Washington about 5 days ago, giving 5 or 6 talks at the Pentagon and places like that, because they're very concerned about this process of how to better anticipate dangers and trends. And analytics are an incredibly important part of the budget of the professional protector caste. And yet, as we saw in 9/11, anticipation always fails sooner or later, at which point we have to fall back on the other thing. And what is the other thing? It is resilience. It is what was shown by the American public, and New Yorkers especially, in 9/11, when citizens armed with these did everything that worked that day. And the professional anticipators and protectors failed at everything. Well, we're going through successive disruptive technologies, and you can ask for this slide separately. I'm violating every rule of PowerPoint there, asking you to read, so don't read. The basic point is that ever since we discovered glass lenses and movable type and perspective, we have had augmentations of what human beings are able to see, what they're able to know and remember or pay attention to, or their reach. And every single time we have one of these revolutions, what happens? Grouches come out and say, human beings were never made to, or evolved to, be able to drink from this fire hose. Suddenly you're able to know 10 times as much as your father knew, or you're able to see 10 times as much as your mother did. What an evolution, or God's plan. It empowers you to be able to absorb all this. And every time the grouches turned out to be right in the short term. But the transcendentalists, the believers, they turned out to be right in the long term. The first product, the first outcome from movable type from the printing press was vast amounts of religious tracts and hatred that exacerbated the 30 Years' War and other religious strife in Europe. But eventually people started learning to use the information. In the 1930s, loudspeakers and radio seemed to expand and exponentiate the godlike sense of gifted polemicists. And all over the world, populations threw themselves at the feet of these gifted polemicists. And the chief difference in the English-speaking world was that the gifted polemicists who went on radio and loudspeakers in England and the United States happened to be on our side. Well, I'd like to give ourselves some credit for that. Maybe we chose them to be on our side. But in any event, the fact is that it took a while for people to get used to these technologies. And now we're drinking from a fire hose. And you folks are helping to try to balance that. Well, there are problems when you're trying to deal with this. Every single generation has dealt with these revolutions with fear that maybe this is too much, the future is rushing at us too much. We are engaged in hubris, arrogance. And there's always the temptation of renunciation or to hand control over to a trusted elite. But we never turn down these new prosthetics of vision, memory, attention, or reach. So how will our wisdom be challenged? I'm going to give you a bunch of examples. The first example is the most irritating, and that is that online interaction has not improved our discourse. It's not made us more erudite. How many of you saw Ken Burns' famous Civil War series? Did you actually hear what those letter writers of that era sounded like in their letters? Yes, they were cherry-picked to be especially moving. But to compare that to tweets, well, I imagine there are probably some beautiful tweets that 100 years from now will be on some show. But the fact of the matter is, there's very little of it that is helping us to negotiate with each other, and I'll get to that. And it turns out there are some better ways that we could communicate online that have never been tried. Professional journalism is dying. Why? Because online you can get anything you want for free. The advertisers have fled from journalism. There is an approach that might make a difference, and that is if we follow the example of PayPal, but using a different system that doesn't turn off users by forcing them to use passwords. If we had a system of micropayments, most of you would be willing to pay a nickel to the New York Times for an article that you enjoyed. This whole notion that everything has to be free is ridiculous. People are willing to pay what the value of their time. The problem is inconvenience. And so a system of micropayments that might work. You're all aware that 3D printing, 3D manufacturing is coming. It's here. There's talk of being able to 3D manufacture whole buildings, homes on site. I'm involved in NASA's Innovative and Advanced Concepts Group, and we've been funding the possibility of being able to having a robot actually make, by using these methods, habitats on the moon and Mars. There's some familiar faces. Steve Mann, the human cyborg, who has slowly over the years developed the capability of walking around with a complete audio-visual system on your head. And for a while there was baking his head. Well, we know there's another face down there who's got the same last name as mine. But in any event, we're seeing the Google Glass starting to take shape. And in my novel, Existence, I portray this going on in 40 years, where it's extrapolated considerably farther, where you might be going down the street in a complete immersion, and little gel stalks might go up and look around in all directions, so no one would ever sneak up on you again. You can see above the crowds and around corners. We're enhancing ourselves the old-fashioned way, with augmentations, with devices that soon will be a part of everyday life. By the way, these images were created for the video trailer for my novel Existence by the great Bay Area artist Patrick Farley, who is here in the audience right now, and I'll ask him to stand at the end of the talk. Now, I want you to think about basics, about fundamentals. What is this? What is all this stuff you have in your wallet? These are all prosthetics for reputation. It used to be in the village of old, if you needed something from the blacksmith, you would go to the blacksmith, grab a couple of horseshoes, and say, "I'll bring you a bushel of wheat in a little while," and he'd nod and get back to work. Because everybody knew everybody else, and they knew their reputations, and he knew you could be trusted. The human brain can know anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 people, which happens to be roughly the maximum that an extremely gregarious person from a village would be expected to know over her lifetime, as she was the one sent to the town with the cart and shaking hands and making deals. These are all prosthetics, reputation, identity, and they're always under threat because they're the thing that's most likely to be stolen. In this world of the future, you're going to be walking down the street and you'll have biometric prosthetics. The whole notion of a wallet may seem quaint, but they'll have other problems. All of this is in my nonfiction book, The Transparent Society, Will Technology Make Us Choose Between Privacy and Freedom? The point is that the village is returning. What village? You're walking down the street in Bangkok, and you walk into a curio shop, and they're selling walking sticks. Okay, some of them can even break into a run. Terrific. You tap your glasses, you click a couple teeth, you grunt a little, and your sister in Duluth, she has a shop, she's looking through your glasses. And she says, ooh, yeah, I'd like to order a dozen. The shopkeeper has already clicked in, knows your sister's credit rating, knows about her business, and says, I'll have some delivered to her in a week, a dozen delivered to her in the week. You stick out your hand, shake the shopkeeper's hand, you walk away. It's both of your glasses have recorded it. What else is needed? You will live in a village of 7, 8, 9 billion people. In that, when you're walking down the street, a camera on the corner of your eyeglasses will scan people's faces as they walk by and supply on the inner surface of your glasses name tags on everybody. You'll never be at a loss for someone's name again. You click your tooth, you grunt a little, and it fills in a little bit of their standard profile. You click another tooth, and it replaces that with dissenting opinions by their ex-spouses. You're going to walk down the street, and everybody you're walking past will have Fu Manchu mustaches down to the floor and be wearing caveman outfits. Will they really be? No. But you went to augmented reality level X9Z49, which was created by some little putz in the local high school, and everybody's under dinosaurs. Much of this is portrayed in Werner Vinge's prophetic novel, Rainbow's End, although I show some milder versions of this in existence. The point is, we're going to be in this village. If you hate the notion of all of this, you can agitate to have laws that will ban the facial recognition on the cameras. You might succeed. You and other short-sighted people may ban the facial recognition systems, and then you'll be walking down the street, and you'll be wondering why every now and then people walking past you break into giggles. And you'll correlate that they're the rich, the powerful, the criminal elite, all the elites who won't be inconvenienced an iota by your silly law. And you will have been tricked into setting up a system in which there are gods walking around who can see everything about you, but you can't see them. You can't look back. This is like the village of old that our ancestors lived in 98% of the time. Villages that were dominated in pyramidal social structures by a few at the top, hiring thugs that they called police, and bullied by the local gossip. No wonder you're scared of that. One of the greatest of all science fiction authors, George Orwell, 1984, showed you the ultimate image of that. But it doesn't have to be that village. We've already discussed in our lifetimes another kind. That's the American ideal village of Andy Hardy movies, where everyone knows about everybody else, but everybody leaves each other alone, except when they need help. We're going to be going on a real wild ride. We may build enhanced others, and part of the whole singularity issue is, will they be scary? Will they be sexy? Will they be adorable, misanthropic, misunderstood? Or will they emerge at us by surprise like Skynet in Terminator? Only it won't happen from the military. The military likes off switches. No, if you follow the money, more money is being spent in artificial intelligence research by high-frequency trading companies than the top 20 universities combined. And all of it is done in secret and aimed at creating artificial intelligences that are predatory, parasitical, and utterly ruthless. Welcome to Skynet. Here, of course, is Moore's law, and the question is, will we cross? Ray Kurzweil and others are assuring us that within 20 years, the number of floating point operations in a box this size will cross the number of synapse flashes in a human brain. And therefore, we will have AI at that point. Maybe. There's some preliminary evidence that some computing goes on inside the neurons. Maybe 100 computations for every synapse flash, maybe 10,000, in which case it's going to be a harder nut to crack. And that might be a good thing, because it gives our children a chance to be much wiser than us self-righteously indignant, constantly furious baby boomers. I don't know about you, but my kids are nicer people than I am. Okay, talking about improving our kids. We might do it, and these are wonderful images by Patrick Farley. We might do it the old-fashioned way, or we might do it by drugs. We could certainly use more intelligence. We might alter our children. And if you think that you'll stop it with a law, all you'll do is stop yourselves from doing it. The mighty will still be doing it. And then, of course, there's fellow creatures on this planet. We share the planet with others. And in my more far-out science fiction, I talk about what it might be like if we were to alter some of these creatures to make them co-equal members of our civilization. You know, more and more, we're finding out that it's not just apes and dolphins. Crows, corvids, ravens, African gray parrots, sea lions, recently prairie dogs engage in gossip, and elephants can paint. The interesting thing is, this is a sign of humility. It means that some of the things we thought were completely different about us are not quite as intrinsically different. And yet notice that they're all crowded against a glass ceiling that they can't break through. Darwin and nature or God or whatever you like hasn't seen fit to let them break through. But boy, did we smash through. 1 million years ago, then 500,000 years ago, then 40,000 years ago, then 10,000 years ago, a series of renaissances. And the question this raises is, if we are rare in having done this, perhaps what we should be doing with some of the animals is offering them a hand. Now, this causes a complex reaction from people. You know, they are already noble. Well, yes, we should save their habitats and let them live naturally. Yes, but that doesn't mean you can't take a subpopulation and say, this may hurt for a few generations. But at the other end, you might be contributing more diversity to our councils, more diversity to our civilization, uniquely chimp or dolphin art forms. Maybe you'll spot some mistakes that we would have fallen into without this widespread diversity. Because haven't we done that already in this culture? Gained more wisdom by spreading out, by becoming more diverse? There are times when this is absolutely necessary. Ask Iceland. Who out there knows what I'm talking about? Yes, the men came off the fishing boats in Iceland and started banks and leveraged the hell out of their country, declaring, and I kid you not, we Icelandics have a Viking banking gene. And then utter collapse. Do you know that there are very few top-level male politicians left in Iceland? The women took over the country and said, back to the boats. Diversity can be a very strong and useful thing. Well, it's something to contemplate. And if we go out there, it might be good to have partners. So how do we really solve problems? As I said, most human civilizations were shaped like a pyramid. Find for me the exceptions. Throughout the last 6,000 years, 99% of our ancestors lived in pyramidal social structures, with a few at the top lording it over those below. It is the natural human attractor state because if you get into a high position, you will be sorely tempted to cheat to make sure that you get this social structure. We're all descended from the harems of guys who pulled this off. And the brief glimmers of enlightenment didn't last long. And how did problems get solved in those cultures? You do this, and I know what needs to be done, so you do it. And there are people today who are nostalgic for this. They say that these social structures got more done. The power of human delusion is beyond me. And I work in the art of human delusion. I can create chains of incantations made of black squiggles on pressed vegetable matter. Now they even shine out of a screen. And your eyes scan these chains of black squiggles and decrypt my magical incantations into star-spanning explosions, deep human insights, kissy, kissy, love, love, adventure. Delusion can be wonderful. Ever been in love? It's better, even better, when you can turn the delusion into reality, into something wonderful, which is what we accomplish when we get involved in collaborative efforts, like going to the moon, like sending a robot mission to Mars that skimmed through the Martian atmosphere more accurately than shooting a bullet from San Jose to New York through a window and putting out a candle. That then deployed a parachute, that then deployed a rocket, that then deployed a crane, that lowered to the Martian surface a six-wheeled SUV-sized laboratory that is still exploring the surface for you. But there are people in our civilization today who have nostalgia for the pyramidal social structure instead of the diamond-shaped one, which is the American dream, which is our dream, the notion of a super-empowered, dynamic middle class. Well, how do we solve problems? Complicatedly. A lot of very complicated processes. Nobody's saying you do that, but instead people criticizing the big plans of the big leaders saying, hey, Napoleon, I hear they have snow in Russia, which is what the pyramidal guys didn't like to hear. Constantly coming up with new forms of doing the thing that enables us to get things done, and that is the positive sum game. How many of you know what the positive sum game is? One of the most important books of the last half century was Robert Wright's Non-Zero, which explains this concept. At least wiki it. The zero-sum game is a game in which I win by making you lose. The positive-sum game is what we have when we have markets and democracy and science and justice courts that take advantage of competition, but without the blood on the floor, maximizing the extent to which we cancel each other's stupidities in the marketplace or in the scientific journals or in democracy, while at the same time discovering each other's discoveries and moving up together, which is what intellectual property law is supposed to do. That's what negotiation is about. So the question is it still working? Obviously not. The United States of America is engaged in phase 3 of its civil war, and you call it anything other than that, and I don't know where you've been. The question is, have we been provoked deliberately in order to prevent us from being the people who do positive-sum games? Douglas Adams, the great author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, said human beings are almost unique in having the ability to learn from the experience of others by reading about them, by empathizing with them, and also remarkable for their disinclination to do so, but instead to clutch to whatever mythology we've got, and that is how you fall back into a pyramidal social structure. So why don't we negotiate anymore? Well, you know, I'm actually not sure these will play. No, they won't. This is why. Who remembers this? Come on, Network. Did you ever watch Network? You know what this guy says. Now, I want you to get up now. I want you to get up and go to the window. I want you to go to the window and open it, stick your head out, and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. Oh. Most of you are probably too young. We're in a righteous rage all the time. So how much change as we rebuild the village? How much will change? Well, we have our options in front of us. We could easily slump back into a pyramidal social structure, or do worse. This is what happened in Periclean Athens. The brief, brilliant Renaissance that went wrong because they didn't know how to do it right. We don't know how to do it right. But we've been keeping it going for more than 200 years, constantly restoring and reinvigorating methods to prevent cheating, and yet keep the competitive markets going. And you know that science fiction has been very bad at showing us examples of where this might go. Because, lordy, science fiction, especially Hollywood, has concentrated almost totally on showing us dystopic, apocalyptic visions of the future. Why? Why? Why do they always portray our neighbors as being useless sheep and our institutions as being completely useless? How many times in a movie have you ever seen the protagonist dial 911 and actually get useful help? Ever? Well, there's a reason for it. If you're in trouble, and don't forget, the biggest thing you have to have if you're a director of a movie or an author of a novel is you need to put your heroes in pulse-pounding jeopardy for 90 minutes or 600 pages of a novel. Oops, I just lost some sales by telling you how long my latest novel is. The point is that if your job is to put your hero in pulse-pounding jeopardy, it's a real buzzkill if they dial 911 and skilled professionals leap to their aid. Despite the fact that that's exactly what would tick off the director if she was ever in trouble and dialed 911 and didn't get instant help by skilled, polite professionals. What an irony that only Star Trek and one or two other films and TV shows have ever actually shown a future civilization functioning. If you dial 911, the phones don't work. Actually, I don't mind that one. That separates the hero, the protagonist, from useful help in a way that doesn't insult the rest of us in our civilization. But usually they don't come. They come late. If they come on time, they're incompetent. If they come on time and they're competent, then they're in cahoots with the bad guy. There is a sliding scale. As the villains get more and more badass, civilization is allowed to be a little better because you can still keep the heroes in jeopardy. Reaching all the way to Independence Day. How many of you ever saw that? Oh, all right, finally. Okay, Independence Day, the villains are so badass that the United States government and military are allowed to be competent and good. That's badass. All I'm asking is you pay attention to your mythologies. Now, I've gone back and forth in this discussion talking about both ends of this. the mythological, what's involved in our sinking into self-righteous rage that prevents us from negotiating with each other. But I've also talked about problems, technological problems of artificial intelligence, the possibility of that we will be doing more and more with our own brains, possible pragmatic things that we might be able to do to rescue journalism or to improve discourse and just the art of negotiating with each other. As we rebuild the village, the question will be, will we get there? Can we get to one that our vastly superior grandchildren will look back and say, you know, they weren't as smart as us because they made us smarter. They did not build this wonderful civilization. They did something better than that. They built us. And I don't mean the genetic manipulation. I mean building us the way we were built, by people who wanted us to be better than them. And people who I think succeeded. In any event, that's the question, and I hope at least it's been slightly mind-blowing. Thank you. And I'm fine to, oh, you know what, Matt, just a second. I think we have a little bit of time here, so I am going to ask Jess to run the full, would you like to see the 3-minute trailer that Patrick Farley created? Yes. I think you're going to get a kick out of it. It's going to be the best 3 minutes. Jess, would you like to run that? We should, yeah.